Yeah. We should have made, I guess the president's talking about Harvard, but Harvard's rejection of the Trump administration's request has prompted a debate over free speech in the government's role on American campuses. Join us now, a lawmaker who calls Harvard her alma mater. Why, is it not true?
No, it's true.
Oh, it's true. Okay. Yeah, that would be interesting if you call it your alma mater, but,
No, I graduated there in 2006.
Very good. Okay. I knew that. I'm kidding. And has called to defund the institution. New York Representative Elise represents parts of central and upstate New York. She's also chairwoman of the House Republican leadership. I mean, I've been watching. I can't be a fanboy. I cannot do that. So I'm not going to. But you see what I'm saying. I think she's pretty phenomenal in general. And even if you're a Democrat, I probably wouldn't. But thank you for joining us this morning. What did the president say about Harvard?
Just now, so the president just posted a long post on Truth Social about the whole Harvard issue. Long post. Everyone knows that Harvard has lost its way. It goes on and on. I'll skip to the very bottom.
Get some really good.
It involves parts calling the radical left idiots and bird brains who are capable of teaching failure to students and so-called future leaders. Anyway, he then criticizes the president.
Harvard, the new president.
And the conclusion is that Harvard can no longer be considered even a decent place of learning. He says it should not be on any list of the world's great universities or colleges. It is a joke in capital letters, teaches hate and stupidity, and should no longer receive federal funds.
So, with that in mind, I will mention a journal piece today, Congresswoman, that says that the Supreme Court has already weighed in that the federal government should not be withholding even grants to try to force colleges to do certain things. Do you think it's been I mean, anti-Semitism, violence is one thing, but thought. Do we want the government deciding what people can think?
These schools are not entitled to U.S. taxpayer dollars if they're not living up to the standards and not protecting civil rights of Jewish students on campuses.
That's probably true.
And let's take a step back to what has led to this earthquake within higher education. After October 7th, we saw a skyrocketing of anti-Semitism on college campuses, particularly our known most elite college campuses, whether it was Harvard or Columbia. You saw physical assaults against Jewish students. You saw takeover of classrooms. You saw riots of property at school, destruction, and then you didn't see enforcement of these universities against those who violated the rules, violated the standards of the university. These schools get billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer funds. We have a responsibility to be good stewards to make sure that they are protecting Jewish students, and they've abjectly failed. Harvard has been the epitome of this failure. They didn't enforce the rules. They gave the diplomas to those that committed these anti-Semitic crimes against fellow students. I mean, we're talking about physical assaults. And the other issue is these schools rank among the lowest when it comes to protections of free speech. They only want to protect free speech when it comes to calling for the genocide of Jews, when you saw very famously in that committee hearing, which, by the way, is the most viewed committee hearing in the history of the United States Congress, when 3 university presidents failed to condemn calls for the genocide of Jews.
Right, I remember. So you don't disagree with anything she just said up to this point?
Up to this point, we do not disagree. I think that what's happened at Harvard is terrible. It upsets me to my core. By the way, when you asked those questions, I was happy about it.
And you know what? I asked those expecting them to answer correctly.
Correct. And I was disgusted by the answer.
Okay, but
like the rest of America,
the list of things that Trump is demanding that you think he shouldn't be doing.
I was disgusted by it.
Right.
The question that then becomes the idea of defunding the university at the federal level, and what is the right approach for them to change their behavior. Now, I think, this is my own view, that you asking those questions is absolutely what should happen. You should embarrass these people into changing their behavior. There should be public pressure that should change their behavior. Donors should change their behavior. Hopefully teachers might change their behavior. Where I think it gets more complicated is when the government, if you will, using taxpayer dollars, starts to try to change the behavior around the speech portion. Not the, look, violence and the idea that these classes are being.
But if you look at Andrew,
that's terrible.
What the Department of Education has laid out to both Harvard and Columbia, it is not about speech. It is specifically about elimination of DEI, which in its basis, specifically at Harvard, is anti-Semitic. There are countless examples. I brought this up in one of the congressional hearings that the Office of DEI at Harvard refused to respond to Jewish students. This is prior to October 7th, when there was a concern of rise of anti-Semitism. In addition, a mask ban, where so many of these rioters and, frankly, criminals are hiding behind these masks, and it doesn't allow the university to actually enforce the rules. The time and place, not allowing them to take over buildings. And the reality is the only way to get these institutions to respond is to withhold those U.S. taxpayer dollars. They are not entitled. I mean, as a representative in the United States Congress, I represent nearly 1 million people who are working hard when it comes to paying their taxes, and they don't want their taxes to go to prop up these universities. If these universities choose not to take taxpayer dollars and want to continue going down that road, that is their choice.
Here's the issue as I see it. One of the things that they're talking about is who is being hired at these universities, right? Which professors are being hired, what their ideological belief is. This gets to this, and look, my ideological belief is not to support people who are anti-Semitic at all. I think they should be fired and removed from their job.
The problem is, if you look at the ideological diversity, there is nearly zero ideological diversity at Harvard. And my own experience, listen, Harvard does not protect free speech. I was removed from a board at Harvard because of a speech that I gave on the House floor, and they decided to do their opinion. They didn't like it. They didn't, like the fact that I am a proud Harvard graduate. It wasn't like that when I was there. So for them to say on one hand they're protecting free speech, they don't have a history of doing so.
On the one hand, the right hates DEI. The government is insisting on viewpoint diversity.
Correct.
In each department, field, or teaching unit. How's that any different? It's micromanaging it just seems like it's overstepping. Some of the stuff I agree with.
Viewpoint diversity. The problem in higher education, particularly at Harvard and Columbia and some of these sort of elite schools, is you have 97%
preaching to the choir.
Ideologically far left progressives, and that has fueled this deeply out of touch, and it also suppresses viewpoint diversity of students. What was interesting to me is Harvard, the response from self-identified conservative students, or maybe students that don't know and are there to learn and want to hear different viewpoints, they feel suppressed, that they're not able to speak up in classrooms.
Look, all of the things that you're talking about, I agree with. The harder part is I don't know if the government should be imposing that on a private institution. Now, yes, you're saying to me, well, we have these taxpayer dollars and we can use them how we want. I don't know that the American taxpayer has voted to change the way the university operates itself. And so, and my last piece.
I would push back on that because this was a determinative issue in this last election cycle. People paid attention to higher ed, and they're very concerned that billions are going to these institutions, and they're not standing up for American values.
But let me ask you about talking about American values. I think one of the things that's made America great is a lot of the people who have come out of these universities, including Harvard, who've done amazing things for this country. So Jennifer Doudna created CRISPR. She's a PhD graduate of Harvard. These are, by the way, science programs that are going to get defunded. Okay, Eric Lander, who managed to actually sequence our DNA, is a graduate of Harvard. I can go down the list of people who have managed their way in and out of Harvard. And by the way, taxpayers have effectively subsidized that. And I think, by the way, that is a great thing.
If you look at the letter from the Trump administration to Harvard, in the first line, it talks about academic excellence and scholarly pursuits. What these schools have pursued in sort of this race to far left, this propping up of anti-Semitism, is the opposite of that. So those examples are prime examples. But again, we need to make sure that the schools are focused on that and being good stewards of U.S. taxpayer dollars and not propping up this ideological bias and, frankly, this anti-Semitism that has put students at risk. And you made the point. People are voting with their feet. Look at the matriculation rates.
But I like the idea that the free market can do that. I think, and by the way, I like that you're raising these issues and highlighting them for the public. I think it's harder when when the government is effectively implementing these things. And let me just take it one step further.
We're just not implementing.
Let me take it one step further.
These are requirements with our taxpayer dollars.
I understand, but
they're not entitled to that.
But let me make it even more complicated. It seems like, from the reports that we're all seeing, that if you are a law firm, for example, that's, by the way, going to represent one of these universities potentially against the government, that now we're going to effectively go after the lawyers. So I'm just saying that they're talking about free speech. It just becomes very complicated because what's really happening is we're trying to enforce certain types of speech. And I'm saying I don't like this other speech. I hate this other stuff.
The only time these schools have testified when it comes to protecting of free speech, again, these schools are ranked among the lowest when it comes to protection of free speech. I've experienced that myself when I was removed from a board of Harvard for giving a speech on behalf of my constituents on the House floor on election integrity issues. And yet they want to stand up for free speech when it calls for the genocide of Jews. It is anti-Semitic at its core.
Look, and the hate speech,
they can't say
by the way,
it with
the
a
hate
straight
speech,
face.
people should be arrested for the hate speech.
The other issue is the lack of academic integrity. You had in the case of Harvard, the president, multiple examples of plagiarism scandals, which I think the president referenced in the tweet that he just put out as well. So there are a lot of academic integrity issues as well as academic excellence issues.
I have no problem with I mean, I don't love it, but with the president tweeting or truth socialing or whatever he's doing to raise these issues. I think it's totally fair game that politicians raise these issues. The question is whether you think the use of the funding
absolutely
in the context
because they had an opportunity. Look at the past 2 years. They still don't get it. They are appeasing the anti-Semitic professors. They are not enforcing the rules. These schools had an opportunity after that bombshell congressional hearing to get on the right.
At some level,
the only way for
you
them
don't
to
think
respond,
at some level the government is now in the business of trying to enforce something around speech? Just in that.
No, if you
nothing?
look at it, is about what the administration laid out. It is protecting Jewish students on campus, protecting.
And by the way, we should do that. And if they're doing a terrible,
they're not doing that, so why should we be propping up over $9 billion in the case of Harvard? The president is absolutely correct in to freeze those federal funds. Congress is correct, and you know what's interesting, Andrew? This is not just Republicans who believe this. There are a number of Democrats.
I'll tell you where you and I will agree
across the country.
If it was narrow, if you said I'm withholding these funds because I think it is not safe for what's happening with Jewish students on campus to either get to their classes or to feel comfortable that they're not going to be injured or around violence. If it was narrow, I would be with you. If you look at what is being asked, it's a lot broader than that.
Did you read the letter, though, from the administration?
I did.
It lays out very common sense. The elimination of DEI, which, again, in the case of Harvard, was one of the reasons that fueled anti-Semitism. The mask ban to ensure protection of Jewish students, addressing anti-Semitism on campus. Ideological diversity, that has been part of the issue fueling this as well.
All of what you're talking about, there's a common sense piece to it. I'm just saying the imposition of the federal government on, for example, DEI is actually a very interesting thing. Now, to the extent that the courts have decided that DEI is
to our taxpayer dollars. We should have strings attached to $9 billion of taxpayer dollars when it goes to Harvard to make sure that they are living up to their founding mission, which was academic excellence.
We talked about it yesterday. There wasn't money involved, but the government, a few years ago with Facebook and Twitter and all social media, and you argued at the time it's perfectly within the government's rights to talk to a private company. Sometimes they have opinion pages, perfectly within the government's rights to try to influence the public opinion of all these social media companies. Remember?
To influence them.
But now we know it was blackmail. They were withholding. They were not.
And that's wrong. And that's wrong. And my only point yesterday, which I'd say today, is a similar situation. By the way, and that's wrong. And the point is, if we're going to have a consistent, if we care about consistency,
both sides
you can say we can't go back in time to fix what happened in the past. But to the extent to the extent that we're all going to agree that the government should not be blackmailing companies over these issues around COVID and laptops and other things, it also seems to me consistently we shouldn't be doing the same thing to a private university.
Elise, it almost seems that both sides have free speech that they want protected. It's just different.
It's just which speech, and that's the problem.
This is about protecting Jewish students on campus.
But we already went to all the other things.
Go back to that question. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate your university's code of conduct?
We're not disagreeing with that.
They said it depends on the context. You take any
terrible
other
answers.
demographic
Terrible answers, and they should fix it, and they're trying to fix it
differently, and they didn't, and they failed to take action, and it has continued to skyrocket, and they haven't enforced the rules. They didn't hold these anti-Semites accountable for their physical assaults of students on campus.
And by the way, you and I agree on that. And the question is, then why isn't the? But if the mandate was narrow, if the mandate was narrow to comply with the law,
the mandate is very common sense.
It goes beyond the law, though.
It is very common
It goes
sense,
beyond the law,
and
that's the distinction.
You and I have a fundamental disagreement. When you're representing U.S. taxpayers, you want to make sure taxpayers represent our values. These schools are not entitled. If they want to walk away from federal tax dollars, which some higher education institutions do, they can do so. But these schools, it's not a sense of entitlement, and we have to hold them accountable to demand change.
Can I hold it? I know issues. We got to go. How do you feel about the law firms? And the reason I raise the issue of law firms, is because there is a more general view that this administration and parts of Washington are using the power and authority that they have and force that they have to influence, if not talk about threaten or whatever, folks around their perspectives. And that's where this free speech thing gets very complicated.
Well, the law firms, I know after that hearing there was a hiring spree of law firms, of lobbying firms, because it was such an abject disaster.
Right.
I support the administration's action. Some of these law firms have been used in terms of lawfare, politically targeting the president and his administration. But the reality is no amount of lawyering up is going to help these universities.
They
are fundamentally out of touch with the American people.
Is engaged in lawfare itself.
No. This is about accountability measures and bringing back the rule of law. Correct.
That was the
I agree with you.
I
agree with you.
That was the
back to the hypocrisy issue.
I know.
If you think that the last administration was involved in lawfare,
you're not arguing that the left is the hypocrisy. You're arguing the right.
The left, and here we are in New York, the epitome of illegal lawfare against President Trump and Republicans. And by the way, these schools have not, when we go back to, just to bring it back to higher education, they have not defended free speech rights when it comes to conservatives. I can speak to this from my own personal experience. So on one hand, they only want to talk about freedom of speech when it's protecting anti-Semitic speech.
I get it. By the way, I get it.
And they're not applying it elsewhere.
You and I are in more agreement than you think.
Do today. Can you stay? Can you stay till 9 o'clock?
Was she going to lose? Were they going to lose the special election? Like that, the whole drama.
We have a lot to talk about. I can stay.
You can stay till 9.
Can
you come in? Can you come in tomorrow?
I can't come tomorrow. I gotta.
Can you be my wing person?
It brings a little more balance.
Eric Lander, MIT. He went to Harvard Medical School, but he teaches professor of biology.
But he graduated from Harvard.
I don't think he graduated. Maybe Harvard Medical School, but he graduated from University of Oxford, Princeton University. He also was a co-founder of the Broad Institute at MIT.
He was. I know that's where you went.
Whitehead, right? Exactly. So I need to stand up for when you're wrong about something. I need to.
Okay.
And we're going to have the next segment coming up. We're going to need you too.
Great.
Stick around.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Squawk Box will be right back with Elise Stefanik.